Hello and welcome. I am Thomas Kevin Dolan, the author and writer of Little Fag, A Journey of Self-Acceptance and Healing. And today I will read Chapter 11 entitled, I Am Who I Am Because of Him, and it begins on page 70. I wasn't supposed to, but I liked my dad. Actually, I loved him. His drinking sucked. The way he expressed anger was dangerous. His violence was something I could never condone. But he was my father. His handwriting was impeccable, and he made the world's best French toast. I think my attraction to super intelligent men comes from my dad. He was brilliant. Layered beneath my attempts to connect with my dad was my mom's clear message to her children: thou shalt hate your father. The thought of ignoring him or feeling uncomfortable trying to connect with him via the projection of my mom was really difficult. It caused me immense pain, but as I grew up, I was drawn to a relationship with him. On top of him being a fan of my athletic prowess, he was present in my life in the best way he could be. It was a joy that I relished. We spent hours shopping together, talking, listening to each other's takes on the mysteries of life. He was engaging, a skilled orator. I loved watching him as he sat and read. In time, my family became aware of my relationship I fostered with him, but no one ever mentioned his name. He didn't blink when I came out to him. He said, I love you. You're my son. It was the first time I ever saw him cry. Sadly, because of my coming out, my father lost the connection he had with my former wife. He told me one late afternoon she was special, and I liked how she treated me. My heart ached for my dad's loss of a friend. He shared many truths about the family that I think might have been the reason Mom insisted we have no relationship with him. Much of what he shared seemed to lighten his heart and create a powerful bond between the two of us. I think it may have helped my dad feel less sad as well. Finally, someone knew his truth as told by him and not a version uttered by his former spouse, my mom. I was proud to have listened to as many stories and still prouder to know that my storytelling ability was a gift from him. Dad later lost his voice to cancer. His last words voiced to me were, son, I love you. Thank you for being here for me. With that said, he was wheeled off to surgery. The surgeon met me after the procedure and shared he felt it wouldn't be too long before the cancer returned. I was living in Vancouver when my brother called from the hospital to say Dad was nearing the end. As I hung up the phone, I whispered, Dad, will you wait for me? I energetically felt my dad say yes. Hours later, through what seemed to be a miracle to get the last seat on the last flight to Calgary, I was walking towards Dad's room in a dimly lit hospital hallway. As I arrived in his room, where he was hooked up to several machines, I leaned in and said, Father, it's Thomas. Just prior to leaning in and saying that to Dad, I noticed a very large clock, like the one that had been in my elementary school classroom, with an immense second hand. What a dumb place for a clock, I thought. As I finished talking to Dad, his breathing stopped. The long stretch of silence lasting a full minute's sweep by the second hand of the clock, and then he breathed again. My father always prefaced any interaction with me by using my name. It was his way of acknowledging my presence with him. As he struggled to hold on to his cherished breath, he had done just that. He had stopped his breathing as if to say, Thomas, I know you are here. Dad was laid to rest with military honors, owing to his service in World War II on St. Patrick's Day in 1997. What I braved. How did 5 small children have no father? This was a comment I overheard a stranger say when one of my siblings told them we didn't have a dad. The dysfunction of the Dolans was immense. As children, we were led to believe that saying we had no father was the truth, and that denying any existence of him would somehow relieve the family of its enduring pain caused by him. In the 1960s and 1970s, father and son banquets were all the rage. When I was a Cub Scout It was my older brother who pretended to be my dad. At many sports banquets in an athletic genre that my dad knew, his absence was never spoken of. I really wanted to be proud of some aspect of being a Dolan. At football and baseball games that I attended growing up, there were sports media personnel who knew my dad, and they always spoke highly of him. No one in my family ever said anything good about him. My father said very little while at home. He mostly sat in his big comfy chair reading. There was a stoicism about him that I found attractive. I always liked his strong, silent persona. I ached for a level of connection to him as I grew up. My dad, beginning in his mid-40s, would suffer heart attacks. It made no sense that such a strong-looking man could be reduced to such fragility. It scared me to visit him in the hospital. I also noticed there were times, as he sat quietly reading at home, that my older siblings, encouraged by my mom, would create loud disturbances. Balloons burst, cap guns went off, and on occasion a small firecracker would be set off in the kitchen. My heart ached as I watched Dad jump in his chair with fright. No one laughed out loud. It felt cruel. At the time, I had no idea I was witnessing the retribution invoked by my brothers, called to arms to defend Mom. To me, it felt mean. But that meanness was never challenged, and Dad was its epicenter. What boggles my heart and mind today is how such violent expressions could take place in absolute silence. It always felt so eerie and always seemed to play out in slow motion. I often wondered if someone really wanted Dad to die of a heart attack. What I braved, in the midst of so many commentaries of my father, was to relentlessly love him. I knew his violence, I knew his addiction, I sensed his pain. I'd make no excuse for what he perpetrated in his lifetime. His sister, my aunt, always encouraged me to pray for his soul and always to take the time to be with him. At his funeral, seeing for the first time in decades his side of the family, so many of my cousins, my dad's other siblings, all told me how much I looked like Dad, Uncle Jim, as many of them knew him. It was then that it dawned on me the pain caused to my mom and siblings because I looked so much like my dad. And, of course, as a little boy, all I wanted from anyone was to hear how much I reminded them of my father. The unlearning. The most celebrated quality that exists in my relationship with my husband is respect. It is the foundation we forged and then placed a love for each of us on top of that. This has given me the most divine relationship I've ever experienced. When I share that respect is the broadest and deepest in my heart connection to my husband, some people wince. Noticing the wince, I get curious and brave and ask them what that is about. I'm usually told, but isn't love supposed to be the greatest connection between married people? I always answer, not for us. Our first conversation centered around risk. He would share the risks he had taken in being loved. I would share the risk of closing down a livelihood. Both of us were at the precipice of monumental change. I immediately felt respect for him. I recognized his value and self-worth in what he discovered in loving another, and that he would trust me to listen to his story. He was someone I could only aspire to be when it came to loving another. Ralph Waldo Emerson shared this wisdom about respect. Men are respectable only as they respect. In that first 20-minute exchange with my future husband, that thing I wanted most, respect, was what I was willing to give. To this day, more than 14 years into knowing him and close to 9 years into our marriage, respect is still the bedrock of our relationship. It has allowed us to heap boundless love on top of it. The Dolans gave little respect to anybody. No one was as good as us, and no one had it as difficult as we had it. The world or the system was to blame for our misfortunes. I witnessed the non-existence of respect between Mom and Dad. My eldest sister would slag her husband and be encouraged by Mom to speak ill of him all the time. It was so uncomfortable to hear her call him names when I really loved him. He was a prominent father figure for me. I respected him. Priests, teachers, neighbors, family, friends, social workers, all manner of relations to the Dolans were all fair game in being disrespected. I felt so uncomfortable and embarrassed, having heard these scathing criticisms and having to witness family members literally and figuratively embrace some of these people. How phony I thought they were being. Although I had no way of knowing during my formative years that you can't give anything from an empty tank, a valuable lesson from my Nana, I would eventually understand that those with no self-respect would have none for anyone else. The unlearning for me that was most challenging, because it meant separating myself from those that were active in doing it, was to stop showing disrespect to others, mainly because my family had none for itself. By default, I was supposed to join in those games. Disrespect meant to have little or no respect for anyone. I was taught that disrespect was to be displayed, not only by the way I talked to someone or treated them, but also by the attitude and actions towards them. The game was superiority. The bigger end game to never show the complete disrespect I had for myself. I've learned the power of respect and the gifts I garner when I am its greatest recipient and when I'm willing to honor others with the respect that I have cultivated for myself. To ensure I continue to be wary of those that cannot share or show respect, I've learned to look for an array of telltale markers, risk factors, and warning signs to help keep me safe. Folks who outwardly disobey the rules or make fun of or mock me get my highest attention. Those who give me the silent treatment by not responding when greeted or asked a question tend to set off my radar. I have little bandwidth for rude or mean remarks or complaining. A big no-no is someone rolling their eyes as a response to having been asked to do something. Being purposely disrespectful by clapping back with a snarky comment always reminds me to be careful with the level of trust I give someone. I have zero tolerance for folks who barge into my space without knocking or who don't feel they have to ask for permission. I perhaps give the greatest attention to someone who insists on yelling or screaming. Both are frightening energies for me. I love this from Richard Bach. The bond that links your true family is not one of blood, but respect and joy in each other's lives. Whew. Aretha Franklin, R-E-S-P-E-C-T. It didn't exist for the Dolans. It was really tough to learn because, of course, the story I made up is that if I was disrespectful, particularly outwardly disrespectful, I would be loved. So to pull apart, right, that story, that disempowering story for me, because ultimately, as I disrespected anybody outside of me, even as a little guy, I was really disrespecting myself. That was a lesson that was not taught. It was a lesson that I had to spend a lot of therapy uncovering because, of course, I had this value for being kind and gentle, right? Particularly as a little gay boy, and then a younger gay adult, and then me. It didn't feel good not to be kind. I could feel the discomfort, right? The anxiety, at times the shame when I did that. But it took a long time to unravel what it was, because remember, it was a normal functioning for the Dolans, but of course it was an abnormal functioning in the outer world. And one of the 13 or 14 characteristics of an adult child of an alcoholic is not knowing what normal is. So that abnormal became my normal. So I am really proud to have pulled them apart, and I would suggest that most of my life is lived in respect. And sure, there are times that I disrespect, and maybe I don't catch myself, then I can clean it up. But lots of times I can feel myself leaning into this notion of being disrespectful, and I can catch myself. And instead say nothing, be able to take a breath and realize that. There would be the power in changing, right? That generational learning being the link in the chain, having a drop off, so that that behavior for me doesn't continue. And when I think of the younger versions of the new generations of Dolans that are watching me, or even my siblings' children, I'm going to suggest that as I witnessed in my husband in the first 20 minutes that I met him, this level of respect for him I'm sensing that that's a gift given to me because I'm the one that's giving it out most in the world.